We have a fragile coalition, and that coalition is directly threatened by ham-handed efforts by Alberta.
We've got quite the feud here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got David Eby and Danielle Smith going back and forth and back and forth. Started off with David Eby running his mouth like an absolute buffoon. Danielle Smith responded. David Eby coming back. Danielle Smith coming back. Now we have David Eby again. Both of them going on CTV, one after the other. He is trying to block prosperity in Canada. His ideology is being put ahead of prosperity. Are there other financial benefits that he's reaping from these projects that are so important to him? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense with David Eby. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, most of this episode is going to be about David Eby and Danielle Smith and this big feud that's going on. But first, we've got Mark Carney comes back to Ottawa, and look at this behavior here. He's clearly poopy pants about the press gallery being excited about Donald Trump and not excited about him. His ego is bruised. Pierre Poilievre absolutely destroyed him in the House of Commons. It's going to take his giant ego a few days to recover.
But you guys were so excited there. I've never seen a group of Canadian journalist faces light up. You're in the Oval Office. You're going to ask the president a big question. You were just like, you were not. You're never. You look when you look at me. You're just like, the president's there. It's all great.
What about the pipeline?
It's good discussion.
What was that? This guy is out of control. What is this? He didn't even take any questions. He just was poopy pants about the press gallery being excited to see Donald Trump, and then he left. Donald Trump praised him a bunch, but Donald Trump also dunked on him. You got to remember too, Donald Trump praised Justin Trudeau a lot as well. He said he liked the guy, all that kind of stuff, and then continued to dunk on him. Either way, he didn't take a single question here. He just turned away from them when they started talking to him.
It's there. It's all great.
What about the pipeline?
It's good discussion.
He doesn't care. He's so unbelievably smug and arrogant. So David Eby posted this on his X account, running his mouth like an incoherent sailor.
The fictional Alberta bitumen pipeline project achieves literally none of these things. Doesn't have First Nations consent. Makes no financial or economic sense. It has no private proponent, no route, no private funding, and would cost taxpayers billions. The non-existent Alberta pipeline project would put tens of billions of dollars in real BC projects and jobs at risk. On top of that, it threatens one of the world's most precious and intact ecosystems, our beautiful BC coast and Great Bear Rainforest.
So I've already debunked this, but I mean, there's ships going up and down, all the canals around the coast, dumping hot corals out of their ships, the brown town, out of the ships into the ocean. There's no regulation against this. Let's just call it as it is, Eby. We'll have more ways to debunk him here, but let's just keep going.
Salmon alone supports local jobs, communities, and cultures. It's central to both the economy and way of life on the North Coast.
So this is his big arguing point here, is the way of life. It's being threatened by Danielle Smith and the pipeline. It's so evil.
The Alberta Fantasy Bitumen Pipeline means putting all of that, the major projects, the economy, the jobs, and our coastline at risk.
It's going to put the economy at risk to have a pipeline generating $20 billion a year. You believe the stupidity coming out of this guy?
What the Conservatives in Alberta are pushing is an entirely political creation in the lead up to their election for wedge politics at the expense of British Columbia and Canada's economy.
This guy's just outrageous. So Danielle Smith responding here, but we're just going to listen to the end here because we have more back and forths. So she's pointing out the main thing that needs to happen here is Carney's got to get rid of those 9 bad laws.
All he has to do is just address the 9 bad laws that have depressed our economy for the past 10 years. And when I worry about investment capital, yeah, I'm really worried that we're going to have in the future the same 10 bad years that we had over the last 10 bad years because of the federal Liberal policies. So I would say that that's been the biggest depression to investment capital in our province. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get to an agreement by mid-November so that we can turn the page on that.
Danielle Smith goes on CTV Power Play and blasts David Eby back, and she also posted on her own X account calling him un-Canadian, which he is.
Labeling David Eby as un-Canadian, like, why take it to that level? And ultimately, if you're going to make that kind of threat or ultimatum, like, what happens if you get a no on this? Does that mean that Canada doesn't work? And what does that mean that you do in response?
Well, I can tell you that Albertans are questioning whether Canada works. And I'm not telling anything you don't know. There's a very active group that thinks Canada's broken. And so I suppose I could just go down to the United States and start working with American counterparts to see if we can build more pipelines. They've expressed an interest in restarting the Keystone XL. And I suppose we could maybe sell another 1 million or 2 million barrels a day additional to the United States. But I believed the premiers and I believed the prime minister when they said they wanted us to work like a country, that they wanted us to open new markets. When I heard my fellow premiers say that we need to start addressing issues that will allow us to work together to tear down internal trade barriers and get our products to market, this is what it looks like, is that we have hard conversations about the things we need to build. And if it doesn't work, then I guess I'll have to work with the United States. But that then is a failure, in my opinion. That's kind of is a failure of the exercise. The whole reason why we've had this recalibration in Canada in the last 8 months is because people are nervous that we are too reliant on the United States. So changing so that we become even more reliant on the United States seems to be a failure.
You can't argue this, because when it comes down to it, David Eby is blocking prosperity for all of us, and he's not giving any good reason on that. This is the whole point of this. We're supposed to be exporting oil to more countries, Japan, Korea, India, not more to America, where they're getting a huge discount on our oil. We're subsidizing their oil and gas industry down there, hence they have cheap gasoline. This is the point. We're supposed to be selling our oil at the top price, not bottom barrel to America. Meanwhile, we've got the snake David Eby. It says BC NDP sticking to their secretive ways if replying to complaints over Shishla deal are any indication. One can reasonably assume that Cabinet Minister Christy Boyle was speaking for a Premier and Cabinet inclined to disclose as little as possible about the deals they make with Indigenous nations. Whoa, what's going on here, Eby? This time last year, the New Democrats signed a secret deal with the Shishla Nation on the Sunshine Coast, providing $104 million over 5 years, 6 square kilometers of public land, Canadian taxpayer land, giving it over to First Nations. It says here the agreement was withheld from the public well after the October 19th provincial election. They withheld this information before the election. They should be thrown in jail for this. When the terms were finally announced January 29th of this year, New Democrats tried to portray the news as a mere update, but it was no update. The money, land transfer, and commitments to negotiate Aboriginal title and exclusive decision-making for the Indigenous nation went beyond the earlier terms. The 44-page text was also redacted in parts, raising suspicions. You can see here, Pender Harbour residents upset by Eby NDP secrecy. Pender Harbour residents say they were not consulted or even advised of a new agreement reached last year with the Shishla Nation. They didn't even tell these people that they're giving away their land. This is so on brand for David Eby, just the rat he is. Okay, so jumping back to David Eby here. So he throws another tantrum because this man-child can't control himself.
A significant piece of the BC economy, a significant aspect of the social license we have to deliver major projects like that, and projects that are coming, is the support of communities up and down our amazing coast here in British Columbia. And so if you want to put that goodwill at risk, if you want to threaten these projects and say, we know that your goodwill and your support is dependent on a tanker ban, that the fishing grounds that you count on, the tourism you count on, the lifestyle that you enjoy as a coastal community member, that it's protected by the tanker ban. If we want to say we're going to get rid of that tanker ban and we're going to go after your way of life, let's at least make sure that the conversation is about a real project. Right now, the province of BC, the Premier of BC, is not a threat to the pipeline project of the Premier of Alberta because there is no pipeline project. There is a public relations department. There is a Crown Corporation with $14 million. The only way currently that project is going forward is with tens of billions of dollars of public money.
And why is that? Because Justin Trudeau put in the 10 bad laws that's making it impossible for businesses to build here. You can't be this stupid, Eby. You know what you're doing here. Trudeau knew what he's doing and Carney knows what he's doing too. You guys are all a bunch of losers. Green grifters taking advantage of taxpayers for your own benefit. You should be ashamed of yourself. This guy talks about population and threatening the fishermen off the coast and all this. Prince Rupert's population is 12,000 people, and of that 4,500 are First Nations. And considering all he cares about is First Nations, we're talking about 4,500 people get to decide if we have a multi-billion-dollar pipeline going to the coast. Are you kidding me? David Eby is complaining about the shipping routes. I mean, it comes directly from the ocean. The ships just come right into Port of Prince Rupert. There's a direct line to the ocean here, both directions. Either way, you come in here, the Port of Prince Rupert is this one here. You can see big shipping port. What fishermen is this disrupting? The fishermen that are sitting right off the coast right here? There's plenty of space to fish. Not only that, we're talking 4,500 people. And those, I doubt they all have a say in this. It's going to be a couple of corrupt First Nation chiefs at the top that are making these decisions. The same ones that we see in that First Nation university that fired a whistleblower, and then the other board members all voted in favor of that lady who fired the whistleblower, which is against the law, by the way. And so really, it's not going to be 12,000 people of Prince Rupert deciding this, or even 4,500 First Nations in this area. And even if you add in Haida Gwaii here, you'd be up to like 18,000 total people. It's really going to come down to a couple of chiefs that make the decisions here. And this is all about money. And the reason why they probably don't want this project is because they're not getting a direct cut of this. The Port of Prince Rupert will, but the First Nations won't.
If this is in fact another multi-billion-dollar federally funded Alberta project, then where is the multi-billion-dollar federally funded project in British Columbia? That is the question that I'm asking.
This guy's such an idiot. He knows full well that Alberta doesn't want to fund this. Danielle Smith doesn't want the government to fund this. They just want to get rid of the 10 bad laws so oil and gas companies come in and want to build this stuff. He keeps trying to twist these words. This guy is such a deceptive loser.
Why you are so upset about something that you yourself have said is not, quote, real, non-existent, and fictional.
Yeah, thanks. And it's an important explanation, and it's a nuance that gets lost in the headline. LNG Canada Phase 1 was the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. They're currently considering Phase 2. That project requires the goodwill of coastal First Nations, and they support it because the tanker ban's in place. So what I've got right now is a minister from Alberta calling up these coastal First Nations saying, hey, we want to build a heavy oil pipeline right to your coast that you see as an existential threat to your way of life. And hey, what do you guys think about that? But the project doesn't actually exist, and it won't exist. There's no private sector proponent.
He knows there's no proponent because of those 10 bad laws. This guy bring in the existential threat once again. What do they ship out of Prince Rupert? Coal, dirty coal. He talks about the pristine BC coast, and they ship dirty coal out of the port of Prince Rupert. You know what happens when it rains? This gets washed into the ocean. Acidic heavy metal coal gets washed into the ocean. That's not good for the ocean. Whereas David Eby doesn't care, just can't have any of that dirty oil from Alberta. This guy is an absolute hypocrite. His argument doesn't line up. It doesn't line up at all. This whole thing is preposterous. I mean, there's already tankers that come into the port of Vancouver right here, and there hasn't been an incident in years, in a decade or so. This guy, as you're going to see throughout this interview, he complains about how it threatens the way of life for the people of Prince Rupert here. It threatens the fishermen. It threatens this and that, yet they have no problem with all this dirty coal being shipped out of here. The hypocrisy is out of control.
So what we have is a publicly funded, massive project that is threatening privately funded massive projects that are going to pay for public projects across Canada. I find that very aggravating that we have tens of thousands of jobs for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. That's who worked on the first phase of LNG Canada Phase 1 that are being put at risk by, frankly, what is political posturing out of Alberta.
What I find aggravating is this guy brought in illegal drugs and made them free for everyone, and now our entire province is a crap hole. This guy will go down as the biggest disgrace as a premier in Canadian history. That is the worst policy that any human could probably ever bring in to government. There's a level of stupidity that can't even be comprehended for a premier to do such a thing. This guy's trying to lecture us on what's good and bad and what's going to bring prosperity. This guy took John Horgan's $6 billion surplus and turned it into an $11 billion deficit. BC government's finances fall off a cliff with disastrous fiscal update. The EB government's recent fiscal update provides further evidence that the province's rapidly deteriorating fiscal position. According to the update, the record-setting $10.9 billion deficit in 2025-26 projected in budget 2025 now is soaring to $11.6 billion, twice the size of the deficit during the height of the world event. You have to be a special kind of loser to be able to do that. He should never be anywhere near the premier's chair. He shouldn't be a minister. This guy shouldn't be on the board of directors of a lemonade stand. He needs to stay away from public everything and anything. He's a disaster.
Why not call up and do some consultation in advance? Like, why are you fanning the flames of this if there is nothing real to talk about in your estimation? And is it because it is politically popular with a constituency of NDP supporters that you need to support you in your leadership review?
We're having hard conversations with a lot of British Columbians that are concerned about the impacts of fossil fuel infrastructure and so on, but we've got to grow our economy provincially and nationally. And to be blunt, if we don't do these projects, Donald Trump's going to put a giant plant in Alaska and sell to the same markets anyway. So let's lift up Indigenous people. Let's give people trades training. Let's
lift up Indigenous people. But the rest of you Canadians, you guys can suck it, because David Eby doesn't like Canadians.
Deliver low carbon LNG to the world. We have a fragile coalition in the north to deliver these projects. And that coalition is directly threatened by ham-handed efforts by Alberta, because they're not saying this may or may not happen. We're not sure. It requires tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer funding. They're not saying any of that. They're saying we've got a proponent. We're delivering the project. It's going to happen. That's what they're saying in these phone calls to Nation. And so then I've got to go clean up that mess and try to hold everybody together to actually deliver real projects that are going to pay for infrastructure across Canada, that are going to employ people from across Canada in the trades.
I would love to hear what Danielle Smith's ministers are calling and saying, because I bet you it is nothing what he just portrayed it as. This guy's a liar and a snake. That's what we know.
When you invoke the separatist sentiment, though, are you threatening in the eventuality, or the possibility rather, that this is a no, that you will throw support behind that endeavor? Like, what is it exactly that will happen if you deem Canada to be broken?
We have a $6.5 billion deficit. The federal government has a $100 billion deficit. You don't eliminate that by printing money out of thin air. You eliminate that by investing in projects that build wealth. And the kind of things that build wealth are pipelines to markets that want them. If we build a 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the BC coast, that's another $20 billion a year in GDP, 40% of which goes to governments, half to the federal government and half to the provincial government.
And yet we've got BC NDP David Eby wanting to block prosperity and more tax dollars. And yet we've got Mark Carney wanting to send $1 trillion private sector dollars down to America. When are we going to get someone in charge that is for Canada? We have a bunch of losers running Canada.
Why would we settle? Why would we settle with running nothing but deficits? Why would we settle with the problems that we have at the federal level that even the PBO is warning about is getting very dire? We've got to start finding ways to be able to build things again. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make sure that Canadians are on board and understand what that looks like, because we can't have the next 10 years be like the last 10 years. We have to build a lot more of the kinds of projects like TMX for the benefit of everybody.
Alberta will be pushed into closer integration with the U.S. and independence. That's what's happening here. And Alberta is getting pushed closer to separation because of David Eby and Justin Trudeau, really the two of them together. What's Mark Carney going to do? Is he going to do Keystone XL pipeline? We keep seeing that popping up. Is that going to be his way to deal with Trump and appease Alberta?
To have the Premier of Alberta say, well, unless this pipeline goes ahead, we're looking at leaving the country. I mean, look, I would like tens of billions of dollars of federal funding for projects in British Columbia. I'll show you what we can do. But we're doing projects without tens of billions of dollars in federal funding. And I don't see why Alberta would leave the country if they didn't get that.
This guy's such a temper tantrum loser. He's just throwing like a little hissy fit here. Danielle Smith did not say, we're going to leave the country if we don't get this. She's saying that the Albertans are pissed off and will want to separate. And there's already those petitions going around being signed. Secondly, she doesn't say she wants federal money. She just wants those laws removed so proponents will come back and build pipelines. I don't know why he thinks he can twist Danielle Smith's words and the whole situation and thinks he can get away with it, because we're not stupid, Eby. This guy is a snake.
She, with all due respect, just two quick things. I've interviewed the Prime Minister the Premier on two separate occasions just on this announcement. She has said that it would mean Canada doesn't work. She did not ever say that she would leave the country. She said she would end up shipping more oil to the United States, which is the opposite of the objective that premiers in the aggregate and the Prime Minister have expressed about weaning ourselves off of U.S. dependence. I would also just put to you, like, why do you reflexively reject the economic, the sort of growth generating prospects of a bitumen pipeline and look at TMX, right? I understand your criticism of there being taxpayer dollars behind that, but just in this first operational year alone, that pipeline has created an additional $2 billion of revenue for federal coffers. That money goes to British Columbia, it goes to Nova Scotia, it goes to Newfoundland and Ontario. Like, why reflexively say that a pipeline to your coast would not be as growth generating as the projects that you cite around LNG? Like, why is it okay for you to exploit LNG and not for Alberta to exploit oil?
Because I'm not asking for any federal money to do it. This is a major private sector project. that is supported by private industry. In fact, a coalition of countries that we're trying to expand our trade with.
This guy's such an idiot. Just because Danielle Smith is trying to push Mark Carney to add a pipeline to the major projects list, she doesn't necessarily want the money. She wants the bad laws lifted. She's only doing that in a way that the Pathways project, the carbon capture project, goes ahead to help the pipelines so the big players can come in and build the pipeline. They don't need the money. They need the buffoons to get out of the way. This guy thinks we're stupid.
We have a publicly funded pipeline already. The TMX pipeline costs taxpayers north of $30 billion. It is not a capacity. There is an optimization project that's available that could significantly increase the capacity on that pipeline. But we're not talking about that with Alberta.
No, that's not true. You're being dishonest again, David Eby. Just stop. I can fact check this guy all day. Does he not understand we can look this stuff up? This is right on the Government of Canada website here. Trans Mountain Expanded System. Here's the Trans Mountain pipeline here. Goes from Edmonton all the way down to the Port of Vancouver where it gets shipped out. And right below it here, it shows exactly when that went into effect. You can see this is the production and how much capacity, and it's been maxed out for years, all the way back to 2006. And then they added the expansion, kaboom. And what do we have here? This yellow line here says capacity. And you can see there, 89%. Recently it's dropped a little bit, 79%. So bobbles here, 84%, 85, 80, 83. Basically around 80 to 85% capacity. You can't significantly increase the flow through here where it's nearly at capacity. We need to build another pipeline now. So when this thing does get completely filled up, the new pipeline comes in. David Eby knows this. He's a lying snake though. He doesn't expect people to just dig in here and find this stuff and expose him as the liar that he is.
We're talking about this non-existent pipeline project across the north, and in the process, threatening tens of billions of dollars of further real projects in British Columbia. BC has massive private sector projects that will lift up our economy from coast to coast, and we're keen to develop them and deliver them. 40% of the major projects on the Prime Minister's list are BC projects, and it could have been the entire list. But all I'm asking for is a little bit of support from our neighbor to understand the fragile coalition we have that we're trying to build to do these things that we have to do because of many court decisions and our recognition of inherent Indigenous rights. And we have to work within that framework. And to just show up and be ham-handed all over the place, we're going to build this heavy oil pipeline through and create confusion and chaos when we need to be growing our economy with real projects. It doesn't make any sense.
This guy's an awful premier. I can't believe you just said all that. He keeps saying coast to coast like he's being intentionally trying to be a jerk because Alberta doesn't have a coast and they can't get their product to market. And then he makes it all about himself and BC has to do this and that. We don't want to put anything in jeopardy. And then he talks about 40% of the national projects are in BC. What a jerk.
But again, Premier, she hasn't done exactly what you're saying. Like, you're misrepresenting it. For example, I have pushed her on both of the interviews that I did on the prospect of public money, and she outright says, like, public money backing this pipeline would be a bad thing. That the endeavor that she has embarked on is to secure a private proponent, not for more taxpayer money to go towards this. She said that repeatedly about TMX as well. She agrees with you on that. But I guess what I just don't understand is, why don't you want to embark on a conversation like the other ones you talked about how something like this could potentially be possible? What are the things that need to be addressed? Like, is there not a conversation to be had, given the crisis we face from the United States, that one pipeline to your coast already adds 0.5% to our GDP on an annual basis? Like, isn't that worth sitting down rather than reflexively saying, no way, no how, this isn't Danielle Smith's world?
If public money on this pipeline is a bad thing, then what are we doing? This is a crown corporation set up by Alberta, fully funded by Alberta taxpayers, backed by the corporation that is publicly owned that runs the Trans Mountain pipeline. There's nothing but public money in this project.
Yeah, because there's a tanker ban off the coast of BC. One of the major problems here, Eby, there would be proponents out the wazoo if that wasn't in place and Carney lifted all the bad liberal laws. This guy's such a slimy, deceptive swindler. Everything he says, he's twisting words. Every single answer.
There is no prospect of private money because we have a pipeline for sale as Canadians. It's $30 billion. Does anyone want to buy it? Silence. Nobody is buying the TMX pipeline. And so if the economics are not making sense for the private sector, but there are projects that do make sense for the private sector that are bringing in, like LNG Canada Phase 2 is going to be the largest, again, private sector investment in the history of Canada. And that is one of the projects that is put at risk by what the Premier of Alberta is doing. And if the goal is to get her product to Tidewater, then the bizarre part that I cannot understand is why are we not using our existing publicly funded pipeline that already delivered $30 billion of benefits to Alberta, funded by taxpayers from across Canada, using that pipeline, optimizing it, filling it up and using it to its full capacity to generate profits for Canadians in the immediate term. Like this is
It's already doing that, EB. It's near capacity. We have like 18% capacity to fill. It's time to build another pipeline.
Why can't both things happen at the same time? Why can't you develop LNG to the benefit of British Columbians and Canada more largely, just in the same way? Even if you optimize TMX, the point the Premier is making is there's such demand, in particular from Asia, that a second pipeline could be supported, could further decrease the differential, which again greatly increases the revenues to the federal coffers as well. Like, why can't both things happen at the same time? And do you know for a fact that any of the projects you're talking about are in peril now, just at the prospect of this fake thing, as you call it, being talked about?
I know that I have had calls from coastal First Nations saying we're getting outreach from Alberta about this project. What is happening? If this goes ahead, we're going to have to reevaluate our support for these other projects. The expansion, the significant multi-billion-dollar expansion of our port at Prince Rupert that supports the export of goods from across Canada, the LNG projects, including Indigenous-owned projects across the north. Because but you have to understand, for these nations, the threat of a major oil spill is existential for them.
Global oil spill trend. This is 1970, 1975 is when it was the highest, and today is way over here, 2024. You can see that oil spills are not really a thing that happen anymore. Very rarely. Spills in excess of 7 tons have reduced over 90% since the 70s. But it's an existential threat to BC's economy.
Like this is like it's a zero compromise position that they are in. They're like, we can support these other things. We support economic development. We get our role. But we've lived here for a long time, and an oil spill would threaten our entire existence.
Talks about the way of life for the fishermen, First Nations. They seem to have no problem with a big LNG ships coming in because it brings them money. And a new pipeline coming in would also create more jobs and bring in more money. Maybe not directly to First Nations. Is that the problem? What about this dirty coal here? That doesn't threaten their way of life, having heavy metals washing into the ocean? No problem there? You already know the answer to this question. Divestiture of Ridley Terminals, that's the name of this coal facility here, Trigon Terminal. So the Canadian government sold this to this private company, Trigon, and in the process here, which is on this website, Ridley Terminals, a Crown Corporation, sold this to Trigon. The purchaser agreed to pay Canada $350 million for 90% of Canada's share in the RTI, the Ridley Terminals. And who got the other 10%? First Nations did. 10% of Canada's share to be transferred to a limited partnership joint owned by the Lakshmala Band and the Metlakalat First Nation. That's why David Eby has no problem with this terminal, because First Nations are profiting off this. Why does David Eby not care about Canadians? That's the problem here. Why does he only care about First Nations? Is he getting a kickback here? Is somebody sliding him some of this cash under the rug? What's happening here?
And so if you're going to engage in that conversation with those nations, you better have a real project. It better be well advanced. It better be more than just an idea that somebody's had that's going to require tens of billions of dollars of federal taxpayer dollars to deliver. And there better be no alternatives. But in fact, there are alternatives. And instead of exploring those alternatives, we're doing something else. And I've got to ask why that is. Why is it that is the priority for the government of Alberta instead of the pipeline that's already publicly owned that we could well advance? And that's why these things, they can't go at the same time. We need to ensure that we're delivering major projects in the short term for this country and our economy.
She's not buying it, man. Vassie's not buying it.
People in rural communities need jobs and employment now, not 5, 7 years, 10 years down the road, funded by tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars. We need
No, Eby, that's not what's happening here. You know full well that Alberta just wants proponents to come in and build this, not taxpayer dollars. This guy's such a lying swindler. And what do you think a big pipeline would be coming in and bringing? Lots of jobs. This guy's no vision. This is just a short-term grift for him.
Those big private sector projects, and we can deliver them, and we will deliver them in BC in a way that lifts the whole country up. But I can't have it that the Premier of Alberta, for political reasons, is advancing this over at the expense of British Columbians and Canadians.
He needs to be thrown out of office immediately.